Sure. So we're based here in Boston, Massachusetts, and we were founded in the aftermath of Boston's busing crisis in the 1970s. That was the moment when Boston's racial wounds and tension were really most evident, certainly within the last 75 years or so. And following those tragic events, that quite honestly our city still hasn't fully recovered from, two communities recognized that our city was facing a challenge. Both the business community on one hand, and then communities of color, and it was primarily the Black community at the time in the 1970s and early 1980s. Both recognized that the city was suffering from a brain drain, that the city was able to attract talent of color thanks to the great universities that are based here, the world-class companies that are formed here, the second to none institutions that one can find here. But we weren't able to retain that talent, and that we weren't able to advance that talent in the ways that were both what we would both expect and, quite honestly, what we would accept. And so both the business community and the communities of color came together to try to resolve this problem. It's actually that coming together that created the partnership. That's actually how we got our name. It's a partnership of the business community and communities of color. And through that, try to create a space where professionals of color have both the skills and the resources to succeed in both their current roles and their future endeavors, where companies have the policies and the practices in place to create corporate cultures where everyone thrives, no matter who they are or where they're from. And lastly, creating a community of peers and mentors and sponsors and advocates so that no one ever feels as though they are alone in this journey. It really does take a team. We're filming this right after the Super Bowl, and it takes a whole community to build champions, and we really do believe that here at the partnership. Sure. So our hallmark is really our leadership development. Our leadership development programs now focus on really 4 or 5 key stages of a professional's life cycle. So for early stage professionals, our programs help explicitly lay out the rules of the game. For so many of us in communities of color, we are taught the wrong rules of the game. We are oftentimes told we have no space and no place in the game. And so it does require some really affirmative and explicit coaching in order to help ensure young professionals of color know how to succeed, how to make sure that when you're doing well, your boss and your boss's boss know that you're doing well, how to ask for help. And the whole suite of services in order to position someone well for success. Then moving up the career life cycle, how do you make that transition to being a leader and a manager, especially when you are perhaps still more managed than managing, right, on the org chart? How do you find your voice? What levers of power are available to you that you might not even realize that you've been honing for since the day that you could speak? Then moving a little bit further to making that transition to strategic leader. How do you move from operational leader to strategic leader? How do you begin to think about organizations holistically? And equally important, how do you avoid the common traps and pitfalls that often cause executives of color to stall in the middle management ranks in their careers? And then lastly, broadly, is the C-suite. And how do you make the transition from the C-suite to the corner office and the boardroom? How do you use your platform to create an environment so that there are more who are behind you than there were that were before you? And how do you continue to advance both professionally as well as personally, and what can be incredibly isolating as one of the few and oftentimes the only executives, senior C-suite executives of color. Now, built into that, we have a couple of programs that bridge the divide. And so we have a program for folks who might have more experience, but they're new to the management ranks, so they haven't quite yet reached the management ranks. And they may have 15, 20 years of experience, but whether the way that their companies are structured, maybe you're working at a satellite office rather than in headquarters. And so how do you make that transition? How do you accelerate your career so that you can be placed on that management track? And then I think most specifically for this audience is our biodiversity program. And this program, for the rest of our programs, we actually do believe it's an important part of our pedagogy that the participants come from a wide range of industries, from retail to financial services, to high tech, to academia, and you name it. But we recognize that advancement within the life sciences is very different than just about any other industry, that the professional life cycle actually amplifies that isolation. And that once you get into especially larger life science firms, whether it's divisions by therapeutics or divisions by geography, you may work in the same building as other professionals of color, but never see them in the halls, never see them at a bench next to yours. And so we designed this program to really address those very unique, specific challenges of the life sciences. I'm going to brag about my colleagues a little bit and say that some of this is just magic. I don't know how they do this all the time, but in reality, what we do is threefold, right? So the first is helping develop leadership skills, right? And especially in the life sciences, oftentimes professionals are developing technical skills. Right, you are expert in microbiology, right? And the path that you have taken over the years to get there means that you succeed at every step of the way. You are excelling at every step of the way in being a subject matter expert, right? And part of leadership is becoming a generalist. And so a big piece of the program is helping expose participants to really that shift in mindset, right? And that includes everything from thinking about your personal brand, right? And for folks who are on PhD tracks, right, their personal brand might be thinking about publishing, but really it's so much more than that, right? Thinking about how others view you, how they perceive you, what's your entire 360 personal brand. Negotiations, right? Understanding the motivations and the drivers of folks in vastly different departments and units from your own. It is finding your voice. And I think that's probably the most important piece of the program. And this is, I think, the piece that's probably the most magical. Through our executive coaches and our faculty members, it's finding your voice so that, excuse me, first of all, you need to be seen.
Yeah.
Right. First of all, you need to be seen. And so our faculty members and our coaches, they see you. Then you need to be heard, right? And folks need to know that you've been heard. And then you need to be encouraged and empowered to share your voice and be seen by others. And for that element, it is also that empowerment, that encouragement is coupled with the need, right? It's not just that you need to speak up, others need to hear what you have to say. And that's really what's different about this program. And that's the piece that, quite honestly, even as the CEO and someone who sits in on many of the classes, it's hard to say exactly when that happens. But each and every one of our participants, when they complete the program, they've gone through that transition. For some of them, it's thinking about their brand. For others, it's thinking about how they unlock a particular problem with their team members. For some, it is that recognition that I love being in the lab because I can control everything. Being a manager means I got to spend a lot of time with people, right? And they're harder to control. And just making those switches, and you see it in each and every one of them. They happen at different times, and it's different triggers. And to use the way that we describe it in biodiversity, it's different catalysts, obviously, but the results are uniform. That coming out of these programs, these professionals and these executives have a greater leadership presence. They have a more assertive voice. They have a greater understanding of their place in the organization and how they contribute to the overall goals of the company. And they are more empowered to speak up for changes and advancements and innovations that they believe and that they see can actually drive the business forward. And that's the hope, right? You hope that coming out of these programs, you have new voices and new leadership contributing to companies' mission and bottom line.
Yeah, and if I could just, go on one of these tangents that we talked about. I've been talking to, at ScienceBoard, we're, supporting Black History Month this month in February. And so I've been talking to different people, and maybe just a comment that, I am not a person of color, but I am a female in the life sciences. And these problems sound very similar.
They're so similar. They're so similar. And, one of the things that brought me back to the partnership, I'm originally from Boston. Right? My mom actually ran the partnership when I was a teenager. So I really grew up in this organization. But I moved to Washington, and I worked in the Obama administration running voting rights initiatives for the Democratic Party. And so I was traveling all over the country, and wherever you find voting rights challenges, you find Black and brown communities, right? And I would come back to DC, and I'd be shaking my head saying, God, I wish there was a partnership in this city or that city, an organization, a network of professionals who could help provide voice and leadership to those who are struggling with the same challenges that we have in Boston, right? Boston oftentimes is portrayed as this incredibly racist city, and certainly we have our fair share of racism, but we're not the outlier that we are portrayed. And what we really are is we're a cold city, right? And we're cold both, it's 15 degrees outside today. It's warming up to 15. But we're also cold in that we aren't very welcoming, right? We don't smile. We don't make eye contact with strangers walking down the street. And a colleague of mine, a white woman, she and I used to work together in DC, and then she moved up to Boston, and she was talking about how hard it is to meet people and all of the challenges that she was facing, how isolated she felt. And it just connects the dots, right? That so many of us feel that we can't bring our full self to the office. So many of us feel as though we have to wear three hats. We have to be great at our job. We have to be the spokesperson for our race or our gender and our identity. And we need to be either the chief diversity officer, or we need to work for the chief diversity officer in order to be part of the solution. And that together, when we recognize that this isn't isolated to your boss, right? This isn't isolated to your company. This isn't isolated to your industry, but these are really challenges that are common to so many of us. The two things happen. One, you get a little bit more confidence, right? You realize that you're not alone in this, and I guess it's true. Misery does love company. But secondly, you begin to appropriate strategies that have worked across various companies in various disciplines, and that's what's so empowering about working at the partnership, is that we're able to see how something that maybe worked for a company in retail can then be applied into a life sciences firm, and vice versa, right? And that's really the piece that's most exciting, because culture and diversity, it's not just racial culture, and it's not just racial diversity. It's getting diverse perspectives that can then drive innovation and advancement. I mean, how much time do you have, right?
That was a loaded question.
Yeah, but we'll try to simplify that a little bit. Diversity and inclusion oftentimes starts, it's almost an HR initiative, right? And certainly you want a diverse workforce. You need a diverse workforce, right? Just for like the very reason that we were saying, that diverse teams, time and time again, are proven to be more innovative. They're faster at problem solving. They're more creative at problem solving. They're faster and more creative at developing new products. They're faster and more creative at opening up new markets, right? So there's a very strong business case for diversity and inclusion within the HR function. I'm really thinking about talent, which in our opinion, working with over 150 companies each year, talent is the only long-term competitive advantage that any company has, right? And the ability to recruit and leverage talent is really what separates the companies that win from the companies that lose. And even within the talent, you need to be thinking about it at multiple levels. What certainly do your rank and file employees, and what's the diversity makeup of that? But it's got to extend to the executive ranks. It's got to extend to the C-suite, and it's got to include the boardroom. And so at the partnership, we work with companies at every level. From entry all the way, again, to the boardroom. But that's just the start. That's just the start. And one of the things that has been positive, if we want to call it this, about the COVID pandemic has been the elevation of health equity as an issue, or health inequities as a problem. And recognizing that so many of these diseases, that from cancer to heart disease to Alzheimer's, disproportionately are impacting communities of color, making sure that clinical trials are representative of those communities, not just because it's the right thing to do, but that's where the market is taking you, right? Recognizing that new therapeutics may be developed that are specifically targeted to diseases and ailments that disproportionately impact people in communities of color. Thinking about diversity and inclusion as a business opportunity is part two of this. What are the markets that can be developed and leveraged as a result? And then lastly, and this is, I think, the toughest piece, which is part of why this is so hard is because we're dealing with structural racism, right? 400 plus years of structural racism. And so what are some of the structural steps that a company can take in order to reverse some of these impacts as well? And so thinking about, where do you bank? Who are some of your vendors? What are some of the contracts and the relationships that can be intentional in terms of breaking the walls of structural racism so that wealth and prosperity that has been intentionally denied for so many begins to flow into those communities? And that is what really separates the companies that are thinking about diversity and inclusion at the best of class versus those that are just taking the first steps, right? One of the great opportunities offered by the pandemic is that it really did help accelerate our ability to deliver our programs across the country. Right? I shared before, I rejoined the partnership in part because I recognize that the challenges that we have, the opportunities that we have as well in Boston, can be shared elsewhere. Right? So if you are a leader in the life sciences, if you are a person of color, or you have somebody in your network who's looking to take that next step in their career, who's looking for the skills and the resources, as well as the networks that are so important to again, not just advancing our careers, but really helping establish and build roots in our communities. Then the partnership, I think, is really it's unrivaled. It really is unrivaled in terms of a service, and we're happy to talk with you. Our website is thepartnershipinc.org, and I think our results speak for themselves. We have over 5,500 alumni, and our alumni are CEOs and chief justices. They are entrepreneurs, U.S. senators. They have run startups and they have led Fortune 100 companies. They are doctors, they are lawyers, they are accountants. Some of our younger alumni are district managers and assistant store managers and digital marketing assistants and everything in between. What they all share in common is that they each and every day exhibit professional excellence, and they are committed to making sure that their communities, both where they live and where they work, are as inclusive as possible so that everybody can thrive. And I can't think of a better organization to be affiliated with. And I just really hope that someone who's watching us today or who's listening to us is similarly inspired by these absolutely life-changing alumni, and see someone in their network who they think could follow in their path. All right, now you're going to get me in trouble because I don't want to play favorites. But I will talk about two. Both of them were physicians at the time that they went through the the partnership. One of whom, excuse me, so he went through the partnership in the early 1990s, right? And one of the great advantages I have, the greatest legacy that my mom left for both me and my sister is this great example of lives being touched, right? And Tony Coles was a physician at MGH, and eventually went into a number of life science firms, Vertex being one when it was still mostly in the startup phase. Then, unfortunately, from our perspective, had to go out to Silicon Valley to run his own firm, right? Ran his firm, took it public, major acquisition, has started another firm, moved back to the East Coast. But every step along the way, Tony has continued to represent those two twin pillars I talked about, professional excellence, as well as commitment to community. And so Tony's leadership in the business community includes organizing CEOs, Black CEOs, and board members just recently to mobilize against many of the voting rights infringements being seen across the country, and providing voice and leadership in corporate America, helping design and advocate for a platform of economic empowerment and opportunity for communities of color, all the while again, running billion-dollar companies and starting new ones, right? And what's great about Tony, the piece that I love about Tony, is that he always comes back to the partnership. With every big decision that he's made in his life, there's been a strand of the partnership that has been part of it. And you fast forward 30 years, and there's another physician working in the emergency room of MGH, and he recognizes that many of his patients, many of the folks coming through the emergency room, are underserved from a social services perspective. And so he starts an organization called Vote ER to help those patients register to vote, knowing that registering to vote is the first step toward helping folks then navigate a whole suite of social services. And his name's Alistair Martin. And unfortunately, Alistair right now is working in the White House as a White House fellow, and is continuing to make this connection of excellence professionally and community and uplifting community. And these two men, both physicians, could have very easily focused very narrowly on the sciences and the patients who were right before them. But each of them have taken a step back, reflected upon what moves them, what their purposes are, and how they can use the opportunities that they've been afforded to help not just lift others in need, but I think more importantly, drive and advance organizations, right? And I couldn't be more proud of each of them. I couldn't be more proud of both of them together. And they are just representative of the thousands of alumni that we have. Well, we hope to continue to expand, right? And we are expanding not because it's good for us. In fact, some people have argued that it might not be good for us. That there is so much need in Boston that we would never necessarily. The partnership. No organization is going to single-handedly solve racism in America, right? But we hope to expand because we recognize, again, that these experiences that we've had and some of the solutions that we've we've found work, they're not unique to our community, and that they need to be shared with others. And so one of the big opportunities, our programs, the biodiversity program starts on Thursday, this upcoming Thursday, along with a handful of other programs. And we've got 25 states represented. We're in 5 different time zones. And as long as there are professionals, and in our case, professionals of color, who are feeling isolated, right? As long as there are professionals of color who don't quite know how best to navigate the next step, when there are professionals and executives of color who recognize that they are at an inflection point in their career, but don't quite know what to do, don't know who to talk to, then there's a place for them here at the partnership. And that's why we want to expand, because we just want to make sure that no one ever feels alone, no one ever feels silenced, no one ever feels invisible.